All right, folks. Hope you got your coffee break. You're ready to go here. We're joined by the gentleman from Greenwich, from the Gold Coast of Connecticut, Jim Hyams, the ranking Democrat on the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Let's start with an item in the news, which is the Qataris apparently wanted to bestow what would have probably be the most memorable gift given to the Americans since the French offered us the Statue of Liberty. But I don't know if the Statue of Liberty would have had bugs inside of it. Not literal bugs, but like actual mics. So one of your concerns is what would be in this plane if it came to us?
Yeah,
right?
Fair question. And I'm leaving all the emolument stuff and constitutional stuff and legal stuff to the guy who really needs to handle it, which is Jamie Raskin. So I'm just going to take this from the security angle, right? Which is to say, oh, and by the way, I will say, however, that when the Statue of Liberty was given to the United States of America, the Congress deliberated accepting that gift, just as a legal note. Yeah, they did. Jamie told me that yesterday. Yeah, I mean, it's just bananas from a counterintelligence standpoint.
What could be on there?
Well, I mean, let me tell you a quick story. So many years ago, I go to Islamabad and I pay a visit to the ISI, an intelligence service. Yeah, we work with them, we worry about them and all this stuff. And anyway, they gave me this nice little vase, about this big, pretty white and blue vase. And that white and blue vase spent a couple of months in some laboratory with some security services making sure that I should put that thing in my office. So a 747, right? The opportunities for bugging it, the opportunities for structural problems, the opportunities for software. Yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. So from a security standpoint, this is a terrible idea. As most people in the audience will know, one of the places the president can go when the country is in insane crisis, 9/11, nuclear war, is to put him on Air Force One and get him out of harm's way. It's a flying White House. It's a bad idea.
Right. It'd be like having a general contractor redo the Oval Office, who was basically a sort of foreign-owned contractor, right?
Back in the 80s, I think it was the 80s. In the 80s, we foolishly, I don't know the whole story, but we had hired a bunch of Russian contractors to build a new embassy for us in Moscow. Yeah. And somebody was asleep at the switch because when they started looking at the walls in this embassy, I mean, it was just one massive listening device. They had to knock the whole thing down and start from scratch.
So let's talk about what is happening this week. The president's obviously traveling in the Middle East, but sounds open to the idea of turning that plane around, speaking of the plane, turning that plane around and going to Turkey to help mediate talks with the Russians and the Ukrainians. Do you have any optimism at all that there can be progress made in Turkey between the Russians and the Ukrainians? And should the president step in at this point, do you think?
Yeah, let me. So you said optimism. Let me get to your question. But I'm not in the habit of praising Donald Trump. But I got to tell you, the last week or so in the Middle East, Ukraine, Russia is a different story. Yeah. The last week in the Middle East, I go into the week fearing that the Prime Minister of Israel is hell-bent on going to war with Iran. I go into the week worried that we're going to miss the thread of an opportunity in Syria for the new leadership there. And I got to tell you, I think the president has, in this last week or so, played the Middle East pretty darn well. My guess is that the Prime Minister of Israel is cooling his heels a little bit on planning for Iran. My guess is that he's probably thinking through a better situation than he otherwise might want for Gaza. And look, it appears we're going to give Sharia a chance in Syria. That's pretty good stuff. Again, not in the habit of praising this president, but I got to give him some kudos there.
Russia, by the way, you would not hear from Tom Cotton any of those things, because the very reason that you're praising Donald Trump is because he is taking a much more dovish approach to the Middle East than the hawks in his party, which does reflect that oftentimes Trump's impulses are really less hawkish than the folks in his party would prefer, right?
Look, I would debate this all day long with Tom Cotton, right? I'm sitting here in Congress because of the Iraq War, right? My predecessor, Chris Shays, was an ardent supporter of the Iraq War. I could go on. The mistakes of American foreign policy, I'm cautious about broad statements, but the mistakes of foreign policy in my lifetime have been mistakes of being naive about military engagement or about, covert
remaking
stuff.
The region.
Vietnam, remaking the region, changing the world at the point of the of a spear. And so, look, we'll see. But you asked about Ukraine, Russia.
Yes.
Again, I was as horrified as any American when they brutalized the president of Ukraine in the Oval Office. To me, that is a symbol that we will not live down for a very long time. To take the struggling president of an imperfect but victimized democracy and to humiliate him in the Oval Office, we're not living that one down. To vote with North Korea in the United Nations against our allies on a resolution that says that Russia was the aggressor, we're not living that one down. It does appear that in the last couple of weeks or so, the president has sort of evolved a little bit from his one-sided derision of Zelensky. And look, I think that's helpful. The answer here is pretty clear, right? Putin needs to come to understand that the West is there for the long run. No. And only now, coming on June of this administration, I think, is the Kremlin thinking like, whoa, this president of the United States is not the unconditional ally that we might have thought he was.
But he obviously keeps saying that he's going to pressure Russia and then sort of backs off. If there's no progress made in Turkey, do you think we'll see a bipartisan bill reach his desk that increases sanctions on Russia?
I sure hope so. Again, the key here is that Russia needs to come to understand that we're not backing down, because right now Putin is not serious about peace. There's 1,000 indicators of that. And until he comes to understand that we will be there and we will be there and he will continue to lose thousands of personnel, that his economy is eventually going to collapse, he's not going to be serious about negotiations.
And are you more confident that we could get some kind of an Iranian deal on nuclear enrichment?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's going to be a little ironic, right? I mean, I fought the war of the JCPOA, right? Which was this, you all remember it. It was a really tough agreement to get to, and of course Donald Trump tears it up and everything. And so I think the irony is going to be that I suspect that what we see come out of that, if we see anything, is going to look a lot like the JCPOA. But look, that's better.
How do you explain? Is that just because Trump wants deals and he'll agree to a deal regardless of the actual details of
Sure.
it? Yeah.
I mean, that's not a debatable proposition, right? We're celebrating a China stand down. We're celebrating a deal with the UK. Both of those deals, by the way, if we start here on January 20th and Liberation Day got us over here, both of those deals are not even close to where we were pre-Liberation Day. Right. So but we celebrate it. What a master deal maker. So no, of course. Look, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that for him, if he does it, even if it's, subpar,
contradictory to what he said,
so much better than the two worst presidents in American history, Barack Obama and Joe Biden. I mean, that's his analysis.
Speaking of Joe Biden, I should ask you in this moment, because obviously this is a really sort of central issue right now. Is it important for your party to move on by acknowledging what happened last year and that Biden should not have run again, and just say it plainly so that you can move on? Will you say it plainly today?
I was one of the very first House members. I may have been the first House member to call for President Biden to step away from the campaign. Yeah. And that, I won't pretend that I had a lot of contact with the president, but I had enough contact with the president that I had serious misgivings going in to the debate, and then the debate clinched it for me. Sadly, in this hyper-politicized era, I'm listening to Scott Jennings on CNN say this is the biggest cover-up in American history. Right. The reality is we all watched Joe Biden. He had moments of great lucidity. We seem to have forgotten about the State of the Union address, in which he was just, all over stuff in a very. So, it was clear to me that he had no business running, and that's why I took a huge risk and was one of the few people in the House out of the box to say he shouldn't run.
Do you wish you had said that in 23?
I didn't have the information to say that in 23. Again, in the Biden administration, I probably saw the president 4 or 5 times total, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
But for some reason, Schumer and Jeffries just can't say it directly. They keep dodging the question and say, we're looking forward, we're not looking backward. Isn't it easier just to say, of course not, next question?
Yeah, of course not. I mean, I'll say it. I don't care.
Done. Okay,
and by the way, if you don't say it, what you don't do is you don't self-reflect, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I am puzzled by what is the psychology inside the White House, or dare I say, being the spouse of the president, and
right.
Look, maybe he can do the campaign, but then there's 4 years in the most responsible
4.5
job
more years
in the world. Yeah. What is the psychology of saying anything other than, Mr. President, you're a historic figure.
Right.
Do what you said you were going to do. Why is that hard?
Right.
Why is it hard for us to be more honest? By the way, we should be, right? Because we're talking about the most responsible position on the planet.
Right. The issue was always about 4.5 more years, not the following 6 months of the campaign itself, right? Well, all right, Jill Biden, if you're listening, do some self-reflection of your own here. let's talk about.
Not getting invited to Rehoboth, am I?
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to have to stick to Madison and the Clinton this summer, which is not a bad place to go on the beach. So let's talk about your committee, and obviously you're the ranking member now. If you do get back the majority next year and you become the full chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, what's the most important thing that you want to pursue?
The most important thing that the committee needs to pursue is particularly true now. It's true always, but it's particularly true now, which is good oversight of the intelligence community. My fear, and I think you're going to hear from Chairman Crawford shortly, I see it in a lot of small ways and some big ways, which is, and it's sort of a classic MAGA projection, you know, the politicization of intelligence. I hear that all the time. Now, I've been watching intelligence extremely closely for 3 presidential terms now. And, okay, you can point to the 51 signers of the, you know, Hunter Biden, that looks like a Russian operation stuff. But I've been watching the intelligence itself. And since the politicization of intelligence under George Bush, where the intelligence community bent over backwards to find weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, I have not seen out of the bounds politicization at all of intelligence. There's lots of ambiguity about the origins of COVID, and by the way, the reporting shows that. There's lots of ambiguity about AHIs, but the MAGA thing, and to some extent the Republican thing, is that's just examples. You know, the Biden administration had some weird motive for leaning into the wet market answer. I mean, it's just weird. And the problem is that puts a huge chilling effect on the professionals in the intelligence community. Example number 2, and I'll say right up front that I don't have the facts because Tulsi Gabbard has chosen not to provide me or the committee with the facts. But here are the facts that we know. You know, Tulsi Gabbard goes on Twitter and says the ODNI, that's her, believes that Venezuela drives or is a proxy relationship with Tren de Aragua. Why? Because the Alien Enemies Act requires a malicious invasion, or whatever the 18th century language is, or the whole idea that you can deport people without probable cause falls down. Well, I read the classified report, and the classified report says the exact opposite, that the intelligence community does not believe that there is a proxy relationship. So I write a letter to her saying, can we declassify this thing? And then lo and behold, it is weirdly declassified. And it turns out that she is contradicting the National Intelligence Council. Oh, and this week, the 2 chief people in the National Intelligence Council are fired. I try to be really careful and not cast aspersions or prejudge motives, but we need to understand why that happened. Why? Because think of the signal that that sends to the people who are keeping us safe by being true to reality.
Yeah. Is she fit to have that job? DNI?
I had misgivings to begin with, subsequent to Signalgate, where she might have been the one to say, hey, I'm the director of national intelligence. This is not cool. I can tell you what SIGINT capabilities are around Signal. Didn't do that. You know, I've seen a constant focus. Look at the Twitter feed. You don't need to take it from a constant focus on JFK files being released, RFK files being released.
It seems very, very PR focused, right? It's very.
I recognize it. It's the behavior of a member of Congress.
Yeah.
You know, it's very political.
Right.
It's a little weird. You know, really, the RFK files. At a moment in time, at this moment in time, one of the most dangerous moments in our national security. And then, of course, again, I'm going to get to the bottom of this whole Tren de Aragua, NIC firing things. Oh, and then, by the way, I mean, again, I'm just sort of venting my misgivings.
Have at it.
Tim Hawk. You know, I've watched a lot of NSA directors. Yeah. That guy was a Boy Scout. I mean, he was as good as they come.
But is she fit for that job, do you think, at this point?
Yeah, it's the second time you've asked that question. Look, I'm not, until I know, and the reason I don't know the facts, I'm not going to answer that question yes or no. There is a whole lot of questions around everything that I've just discussed. Yeah. And by the way, this is a whole other problem. I now have 5 letters outstanding to the Director of National Intelligence as ranking member, and I don't have an answer to them.
Here's why I'm asking, Congressman. You know her. She was a Democratic colleague of yours in the House. You have served with her for years. Can you explain to me your relationship with her then, and kind of what happened there, what her evolution was? Because you knew her when she was your colleague and a Democrat.
I didn't know her. I didn't know her well. She was a couple classes behind me.
Right. It was 12.
Right. I did look.
Last 12.
I observed what we all know to be true. A weird long meeting with Bashar al-Assad. Right. That was a little weird, a little strange. You know, the run for president, the flipping parties.
Right. Just ambition. Is that what it is?
Again, don't ask me to be an expert on Tulsi Gabbard. What I'm focused on is the fact I've got 5 letters to the director.
You haven't heard back.
And I have not heard back. That is, from an oversight standpoint, unacceptable. So,
please,
I'm not just trying to. I'm not really trying to dodge your questions.
I
don't have the facts to answer your question
Understood.
yet. And in a world where everybody's doing everything without any facts, I'm not going to do that.
Let's finish by talking about some of the emerging weapons that are now coming online. Tell us, at what extent you can publicly, what you're most interested in and what you think could offer the most to our country in terms of defense going forward.
In terms of weapons?
Yes. Warfare, the unconventional methods.
Yeah, let me say 2 things. And it's not about a particular weapon, but the Ukraine conflict, this room will know this, has offered some remarkable lessons that actually very much hold at risk traditional American defense thinking. I think it's a fair question in a world of thousands of drones that will soon be autonomous, whether an aircraft carrier can be a thing. We've got 11 of them or something?
Yeah.
A lot of people oversimplify and say tanks no longer work. Tanks work, but my point is this. What we're learning in the Ukrainian battlefield, the classic example is the fact that the Russians have a big navy that cannot leave port in the Black Sea because they are suppressed by a nation with no ships. The Pentagon is not an agile learning organization, and they need to learn this quickly, and then they need to do something they haven't ever done before, which is adjust the procurement to reflect the rapid learning. Fear number 1. Fear number 2 is, you're going to want me to talk about some cool weapon system. We have just devastated American innovative capacity. I spoke to the former chancellor, vice chancellor of Oxford University this morning. She is getting calls every single day from cutting-edge scientists in American academia saying, how can I get to Oxford? How can I get to the Sorbonne? How can I get to Tokyo? We're no longer funding biomedical research because we're angry at Harvard University for being woke. I have long said that our sustained strategic advantage is our remarkable innovative capacity. We've just thrown that away.
On that sobering but important note, Jim Himes, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.